Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. So as you guys do know, okay, any of you chess aficionados out there, we are playing the U.S. Championships. So I do have the round 7 game between John and Burke and Wesley. And as always, for my people in the Philippines, I will say, let me see, Almasal tayo, mabuhay, aking magkaibigan, kumusta na, magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang araw. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Hello, you lit. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and taking a look at my stuff. But yeah, it's a good game right here. It's a real roller coaster game. A lot of different little concepts and understanding going on. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got e4, e5, knight comes to f3. We got knight to c6, and you have a billion different ways you can play this, but we do see bishop to b5. So, of course, you can see like some a6s. You can just see the regular knight to f6. You can even see some d6. It's a lot less common, but, d6 is a possibly played move. It all centers around trying to protect this pawn. So you want to, either defend it or, you even see some queen to e7s and some super rare lines. But we do have knight to f6. You're just trying to counterattack the same as white is attacking. So you're giving, white the ability to either defend, or kind of go on their own little development role. So we do see d3, just, taking care of this pawn on e4. Now, as you guys always know, it's always possible to just castle here. And then after you see knight takes e5, knight takes e4, you will be looking at rook to e1. d4 is also playable as well. You're just, threatening to open up the position and expose the undefended knight on e4. After knight would come back to d6, you do have knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5. That's just a sample variation. Of course, there's many different ways to play it, but like I said, we did see d3 in the position, and then so bishop comes to c5. We see c3. This is just creating a little space for this bishop to retreat to, so that you don't necessarily lose it. We do have castles by black, castles by white. A rook comes to e8, and this is, preventing the move d4 immediately, because if you do go this immediately, you're going to be looking at some, some threats, on this pawn right here. It will be double attacked. So knight b comes to d2. We see a6, bishop comes back to a4. We got d5, and then we do have the novelty of the game, which is d4. Very logical pawn push. As of right now, black does kind of have a really nice center established. So this is kind of like a Tarrasch type of way of dealing with that. So we do see pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. It's really undesirable to move this knight. So you don't really too much want to go something like bishop takes e4 or d4, because you will be looking at bishop takes c6, and it is hanging this bishop. So going back to what we had, pawn took d4, and then we saw bishop back to a7. And you actually do kind of have a little bit of some problems here on this e4 square. So we do see pushing to e5. We got knight down to e4. Bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and then we do have queen over to c2. Trying to like throw a little bit of an attack on this pawn. But we actually have a really, really nice move by Wesley, and that is bishop to f5. You definitely are threatening to take here, or no, not to take here. Bam, that right there. And then the bishop will be on this queen, but you are also attacking this rook. So the queen does take on c6. We see rook down to e6. Queen goes back to a4. So it kind of seems like you got in and you kind of got out. You got your stuff rolling, but you're actually allowing black to have a lot of free developing moves. So we do have c5 just opening up the game a lot. Pawn takes c5, knight takes c5, and now the queen is a little bit displaced. So the queen has to come over to f4. And, this is actually about a pawn's worth of an advantage for black. And you might be thinking, okay, you only have 5 pawns for black. White has 6 pawns. It kind of seems like white is doing much better. But, the problem is when you look at the position, you see that black is completely developed. Their king is safe in the corner. All they need to do is kind of clear their queen out of the way. But they are much farther ahead in development. As you can see for white, they kind of have a little bit of an issue with these 3 pieces. You know, the queen is kind of giving a counter attack, but I mean, the bishop is just going to sidestep that somehow. And you don't really have like great places to put this knight. You know, the really only thing you can kind of start to try to do is actually try to redirect like this. But it's going to take you some time, and it's going to allow black to start kind of getting a little attack rolling. So we do see actually bishop to d3. And this is a nice, you know, in-between move. You could have always just backed the bishop up here to g6, but why not go on the attack? And this is actually the point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and try to guess what move John M. Burke plays, go ahead and do so. Okay, so John Burke is like, dude, I'm going to be super fearless. And it's crazy because this is like the only move to play. And the move to play is not a saving move of the rook. Like, you know, you could try to go these two moves. But, I mean, if you did go rook to e1, you know, we would be seeing bishop over to c2. So bishop is actually sitting very comfortably on c2. And also it is further discouraging this knight to b3 move because after you take here, the bishop would be capturing back and gaining the pawn back, and then everything is even. But then also the thing you have to think about in the position is, you know, black does have a completely passed pawn here on d5. So, you know, you definitely have a lot going for yourself as black than it seems. But like I said, in this particular position that we had, John does not, he does not elect to save his rook, and he actually finds the best move in the position. And it is actually a Zwischenzug move, b4. You know, it's just a really nice, it's just a really nice in-betweener move because it is, you know, giving up the exchange if black wants to capture. You know, of course, if black captured here, you'd be looking at pawn takes c5, and then you would be retreating the bishop, and then you would actually be getting your knight to d3, and you kind of have given yourself your own passed pawn. You know, even though you have gone down the exchange, passed pawns are very, very valuable. But like I said, in this position, we did see b4, and we actually see knight to e4. So black is electing not to capture the rook immediately, and this is actually giving a little bit back to John. So we do see knight takes e4, pawn takes e4, and then knight comes to g5. So white is actually giving their own, you know, attack on this knight, but also more importantly, they are attacking this very, very vulnerable f7 square. So, you know, they're doing a lot of nice counter attacking in this position. We do see rook up to e7, and then even here, we still don't save our rook, and we actually play the best possible move in the position, which is bishop to b2. So you really have to give it to John Burke a little bit because, I mean, he's literally left his rook hanging for like 3 moves. And he is playing like the best moves that you can play in the position, and he is just willing to give up the exchange. And Wesley still doesn't he still doesn't accept the exchange. He actually goes e3 in this position. We do see pawn takes e3, bishop takes f1, rook takes f1. And I mean, even though black is considerably ahead, you have to really be looking at the situation a little bit from white's perspective, that they do have 6 entire pawns against black's 4 pawns. So they are up the exchange, but, you know, they definitely have some compensation for being down the exchange. So we do see queen coming down to d3, trying to place a double attack on this pawn right here. And it'd be very detrimental if you actually can get that in. So we do see a really, really nice bishop to d4. Bishop takes d4, and then we see pawn takes d4. And, I mean, like I said, I mean, you do have 2 pawns for white. And you actually do have a passed pawn here. But you definitely do have to play with some finesse because this isn't the easiest position to play as white, but you know, you're doing pretty good. Rook does come to d8. You're trying to counterattack this pawn, and then we see knight down to f3. You do see queen over to c3, trying to add a little bit of an attack on this pawn. And, you know, it's not really the best to go a3 because then the queen is just going to be taken. So, I mean, you're going to be down a pawn either way. So, we actually, in this position, see h4. This allows queen takes b4, and then we see h5. And the only thing that's unfortunate about this position that John is in right now is that he's making, like, a few too many pawn moves, and he's starting to let black really just like take the game over. Going back to what we actually had after the queen did come to c3 attacking this pawn over here, is actually going knight over to h4. And this ends up in some really nice variations. Because if you immediately go with rook takes d4 to capture the pawn and to also attack the queen, you are going to be looking at knight to g5. And the problem is this rook is undefended, and you are going to be having knight to f5 coming up pretty soon. You know, this this file is completely open for this rook. So the king, you know, really would just have to step to the side. And then if you actually had, after knight to h4, if you actually went queen takes d4 instead, this actually is a really nice combination for white. Queen takes d4, rook takes d4, and then we have this beauty, knight to f5. And you have just dropped your own exchange, in which now you're just down an entire pawn. You can grab the pawn back, you know, but you're going to be down an entire piece. So you definitely don't want to go this route. So, you know, it is best just to go here and just to give this up. You know, then you can see that white is actually doing really nice. So going back to what we actually had in the game. We did see queen to b4, h5, and then we actually see h6. You kind of have to do something about the pawn just marching down the board. So we do see g4, and this, unfortunately, is actually the nail in the coffin in the game, because g4 is not only making the third consecutive pawn move, your king is just way too open now, and you haven't really done anything to try to further your position the best that you can. So you actually see rook over to b7. Queen does come to e4. Rook comes down to b6. We see queen down to c2. We see rook d comes to b8. And as you can see, you know, black completely 1000% owns this b file. So it's, you know, you're about to be out for the count. Rook does come over to d1, but then we see queen to a3. And we are about to start picking on this pawn. And more importantly, we're going to start to get our rooks on the 7th rank. So you do see rook to d3. You see rook down to b2. But then you see rook takes a3 and then rook takes c2. And it is actually in this position that John Burke does resign the game. And you're resigning because at the end of the day, the move that's automatically about to be coming, if you don't do anything about it, is rook to b1 with check. And you are going to have to throw this knight in the way. So, I mean, you pretty much just have, I mean, like two options. You can either just like block, you know, the rook from coming down, you know, and then, you know, the rook can take, and then you're just down an entire exchange, and this is really horrible to play. You know, one of the only other moves that you can actually do is actually just sidestepping over to king to f1, because then after rook comes down, you could be looking at this, but then this rook is going to either come over here or come down, and you're just going to be in a completely defensive position. You know, this allows the king to start kind of coming into the position. And, you know, clipping off your pawns, you're going to be good to go. So that is an interesting game. Like I said, you know, John did actually play some really great moves, you know, and he was definitely finding those Zwischenzug moves. But unfortunately, he just ended up getting in too bad of a position, started moving a little bit of pawns, and then that ended up being all she wrote. So I'm going to go ahead and get these good mornings for my people in the Philippines. So I have Maayong buntag, mayad na agahan, 9 beg na bigat, pasanto siya kabasan, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na kapiang kapano dios, mayapa abak, mapia, mayad na aga, mapia agay, mapia kapa pizza, my big abukla, marjana buntag, marya may na, malpena aga, kasanyang gansi alabi, salam, assalamu alaikum, and mercy to you. So I would say makito tayo mamaya to my people in the Philippines, metaming salamat, aking makaibigan, and I'll see y'all next time.